Hello, my name is Ron Cline, and thank you for attending. Thanks also to the symposium organizers for inviting my participation. I'm privileged to be here today. For those who want to check me out, I did the silicon design for the original Signetics FPLA, which was used inside the Commodore 64 computer way back when. I was involved in programmable logic and FPGA technology for most of my career. This presentation draws from my 50 years experience in designing circuits for digital use. In the early 70s, many engineering computers were benchtop analog systems like on the left. Those computers drove early semiconductor IC development of analog operational amplifiers. At the same time, new digital computers were coming on board. They filled entire rooms and were used primarily for financial accounting work, but could also do very high precision arithmetic. We know the story of what happened. Digital, of course, won the day. But digital computers are built with the same basic components as the analog computers. Digital circuits are created out of analog components. That conversion from continuous to discrete was my job for 50 years. Now, if I were to design a continuous domain processor with neurons, not discrete, but physical and continuous, what would be the most basic issue from my point of view? How to make a simple decision. In the early 70s, we discovered a fundamental limitation of basic circuits that we didn't know about before. Let's take a look at one of the simplest functions a system can perform: to sense an input and adjust the system state immediately based on that input. Here I have shown a sample system that has only one objective. If I receive a request to enter into a particular state, then go into that state right now. But what happens if we get two requests at the same time? What happens in our system? At first, it sees both input requests. And since, of course, the system is designed for fast response, both state outputs immediately go active. But the system understands there's a conflict and tries its best to resolve which input takes precedence. And that takes some time. Once in a while, a lot of time. And there's no way to know when beforehand. And that uncertainty turns out to be fundamental. So let's go back into history. In the early 70s, Intel released their first microprocessor chips. At that time, they started getting reports from the field that the system would crash, but they couldn't figure out what happened, and they would just reboot it, and it would start up again fine, and they couldn't repeat the failure. It was eventually found a random synchronization error occurred when the memory chip requested a refresh at the same time as a new processor command was issued. The arbiter latch in the memory controller chip could not resolve the conflict before the next clock cycle, causing functional failures. This is a waveform from one of the reporting IEEE journals at that time. And the first thing I did when I saw it was I went out to the lab and I looked at my own flip-flops that I had just designed, and sure enough, I saw the same waveforms. It is fundamental and cannot be fully eliminated. And since the 70s, the semiconductor industry has established a functional spec for saying, okay, you must have a mean time between failure of greater than 10 years. It is still a standard checkoff item today at time enclosure, and from my own experience, getting past those tests can be a barrier to silicon tape-out. This graph is from a previous presentation I delivered at the Tucson conference 5 years ago that went into a deeper technical dive on this topic. This shows a decision characteristic of a roughly 10-year-old silicon technology. This is a standard curve generated whenever a new silicon transistor process is developed. The diagonal orange line, indicating a tau of 20 picoseconds, is a typical characteristic time constant for that process, basically indicating how fast a transistor can amplify a signal. The vertical axis is logarithmic and has each horizontal grid line at 100 times the one beneath it, representing the average failure time expected for a basic 2-inverter latch to resolve. I've shown the intercept for a clock frequency of 1 gigahertz, which is typical for a chip on this process, and you can see the intercept at roughly 1 day mean time between failure. Note that if you try to improve decision time by increasing the power, it takes a lot of extra power to get any kind of improvement in delay time. If we plug in an estimated time constant for neural connections of 10 milliseconds, then the resulted expected classical failure rate is roughly 1 every microsecond. The brain is literally operating close to the edge. Obviously, my silicon standard rules for decision functionality won't work in the brain. What does this mean for us humans? Humans by nature have curiosity and are constantly getting into new situations where no prior experience is coded in the brain. If we increase neural firing rates to, for instance, a super gamma wave frequency that increases the power, we would probably have to increase our head size, and it still doesn't solve the fundamental problem anyway. So what to do? Well, this would be nice if there was a quantum assist in a hybrid system for making decisions like this, and if state representations in the brain had a quantum aspect to them, and perhaps if you have two potential future state requests and they are somehow superposed and entangled, this would give an evolutionary advantage at no extra energy cost. So the conclusion is that continuous domain systems, including our brain, have a fundamental limitation, a specific subclass of decisions that will have uncertain outcome delays. Evolution would favor a quantum-aided solution to reduce decision time when necessary for survival. This would be a reason for existing for quantum-aided awareness. And I suggest the big C consciousness may then access such a biologically created quantum process to direct conscious action. Thank you for your kind attention.